Picture this. You're looking in the mirror, and for just a split second, you don't recognize the person staring back at you. That moment of confusion isn't random. It's your soul trying to tell you something crucial. What if I told you that 90% of people live their entire lives without ever meeting their true selves? What if the person you think you are is actually a carefully constructed lie? Right now, as you're watching this, there's a war happening inside your mind. A battle between who you really are and who you've been programmed to become. And here's the terrifying truth. Most people lose this war without even knowing they're fighting it. If you've ever felt like you're wearing a mask that you can't take off, if you've ever wondered why success feels empty, or if you've ever had that nagging feeling that you're living someone else's life, then you need to hear what I'm about to tell you. Because what you discover in the next few minutes could completely transform how you see yourself and your entire existence. But before we dive deep into this psychological rabbit hole, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this journey to its conclusion, and the insights we're about to uncover don't come around often. Let me start with a question that might make you uncomfortable. How much of your personality actually belongs to you? Think about it seriously for a moment. Your beliefs about success, your ideas about relationships, your fears, your dreams. How many of these thoughts originated in your own mind versus being planted there by parents, teachers, friends, social media, or society itself? The legendary psychologist Carl Jung spent his entire career studying this exact phenomenon, and what he discovered will shake you to your core. He found that most human beings are living as psychological prisoners, trapped in identities that were designed by everyone except themselves. And the most disturbing part, they're completely unaware of their captivity. Jung identified 3 fundamental layers of human consciousness that determine whether you live as your authentic self or as a sophisticated puppet. Understanding these layers isn't just academic knowledge, it's the key to psychological freedom. It's the difference between existing and truly living. The first layer Jung called the persona, and this is where things get really interesting. Imagine you're an actor who's been playing the same role for so long that you've forgotten it's just a character. The persona is exactly that. It's the social mask you wear to navigate the world, to be accepted, to avoid rejection and conflict. Now, don't get me wrong, having a persona isn't inherently bad. We all need social personas to function in different environments. You probably act differently at work than you do with your closest friends, right? You might use different language, different body language, even different aspects of your personality. That's normal and necessary. But here's where it becomes dangerous, when you start believing that this mask is who you are. When you lose track of where the performance ends and your authentic self begins. This is what Jung called identification with the persona, and it's one of the most common forms of psychological imprisonment in our modern world. Think about the last time you were alone, really alone, with no one to impress, no role to play, no expectations to meet. Who were you in that moment? Could you even access that authentic self, or did you feel empty, confused, maybe even anxious? If you felt uncomfortable with your own company, that's a red flag that you've become too identified with your persona. Here's what's happening in your brain when you over-identify with your social mask. You're essentially training yourself to suppress your authentic thoughts, feelings, and desires in favor of what you think others want to see. Over time, this creates a psychological split. Your true self becomes buried deeper and deeper beneath layers of performed behavior until you literally forget who you really are. The scariest part, this process usually starts in childhood. Maybe you were naturally creative and imaginative, but your parents valued practicality and achievement, so you learned to hide your artistic side. Maybe you were sensitive and empathetic, but your peer group mocked emotional expression, so you built walls around your heart. Maybe you were curious and questioning, but your teachers preferred compliant students, so you learned to stay quiet and follow rules. Each time you chose acceptance over authenticity, you strengthened your persona and weakened your connection to your true self. And here's the cruel irony. The very behavior you adopted to be loved and accepted is often what prevents you from forming genuine, deep connections with others. Because people can sense when someone isn't being real, even if they can't articulate why. But the persona is only half the story. While you were busy building this acceptable social identity, something else was happening in the shadows of your psyche. All those parts of yourself that didn't fit the acceptable image, your anger, your wildness, your unconventional desires, your inappropriate thoughts, they didn't just disappear. They went underground, forming what Jung called the shadow. And this is where our journey gets really intense, because your shadow contains both your greatest weaknesses and your most powerful strengths. It's the repository of everything you've been taught to reject about yourself, but it's also where your authentic power, creativity, and vitality are hiding. Let me give you a practical example. Say you grew up in a family where anger was absolutely forbidden. Every time you felt angry as a child, you were told to be nice. Don't be difficult, or good children don't get angry. So you learned to stuff down your anger, to smile when you wanted to scream, to say it's fine when it definitely wasn't fine. But anger didn't disappear from your psyche, it just went into your shadow. And now, as an adult, one of two things probably happens. Either you have explosive outbursts that surprise even you, or you've become someone who can't stand up for yourself, who gets walked all over, who says yes when you mean no. Both responses are your shadow anger trying to express itself in distorted ways. The same principle applies to every aspect of your personality that got rejected or suppressed. Your playfulness might have been shamed as immaturity, so now you're overly serious and can't relax. Your ambition might have been criticized as selfishness, so now you sabotage your own success. Your sexuality might have been repressed as inappropriate, so now you struggle with intimacy and pleasure. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's not evil or dangerous, it's simply unevolved. Those suppressed parts of yourself contain tremendous energy and potential, but because they've been forced underground, they haven't had the chance to mature and integrate properly. This is why shadow work, the process of acknowledging and integrating these rejected aspects of yourself, is so crucial for psychological wholeness. When you bring your shadow into conscious awareness, something magical happens. You stop being controlled by unconscious impulses and start having genuine choice in how you respond to life. Let me share something that might blow your mind. Some of your most annoying traits in other people are actually projections of your own unacknowledged shadow. That person who drives you crazy with their neediness, they might be reflecting your own suppressed need for attention. That colleague whose arrogance infuriates you, they might be showing you your own disowned confidence and ambition. Jung called this psychological projection, and it's one of the main ways your shadow tries to get your attention. Pay attention to what triggers strong emotional reactions in you, especially disproportionate anger or disgust toward others' behavior. These reactions are often your psyche's way of saying, "Hey, look at this part of yourself that you've been avoiding." But shadow integration isn't just about reclaiming negative traits. It's also about recovering positive qualities that you've disowned. Maybe you were taught that being too smart would make others feel bad, so you learned to hide your intelligence. Maybe you were told that being too beautiful or successful would make you vain, so you learned to diminish yourself. These positive shadow elements are often the hardest to reclaim because we've been conditioned to see them as character flaws rather than natural gifts. Now, if this is starting to feel overwhelming, that's completely normal. Most people spend their entire lives completely unaware of these psychological dynamics. They live at the mercy of their unconscious patterns, wondering why they keep repeating the same mistakes, why they feel empty despite external success, why their relationships follow predictable but unsatisfying patterns. This brings us to Jung's most revolutionary concept, the process he called individuation. This is the journey of becoming whole, of integrating all aspects of yourself, persona, shadow, and everything in between into a cohesive, authentic identity. It's the process of becoming who you really are, rather than who you think you should be. Individuation isn't about rejecting your persona or unleashing your shadow without restraint. It's about conscious integration. It's about choosing when to wear your social mask and when to take it off. It's about acknowledging your shadow impulses without being controlled by them. It's about developing what Jung called the self, the organizing principle of your psyche that can hold all these different aspects in dynamic balance. But here's the challenging part. Individuation requires you to question everything you think you know about yourself. It requires you to examine your beliefs, your values, your goals, and ask honestly, is this really mine, or did someone else put this here? It requires you to face parts of yourself that you might find uncomfortable or even shocking. This is why so few people undertake this journey. It's much easier to stay asleep, to follow the script, to live according to other people's expectations. It's safer to keep your shadow buried and your authentic self hidden. But safety comes at a cost. The cost of never knowing who you really are, never experiencing true intimacy with others, never accessing your full creative and emotional potential. Let me tell you what individuation actually looks like in practice, because this isn't just theoretical psychology. This is about fundamentally changing how you move through the world. First, you develop what Jung called conscious choice. Instead of reacting automatically to situations based on conditioning or unconscious patterns, you start responding from a place of awareness. You notice when you're slipping into a persona that doesn't serve you. You recognize when your shadow is getting triggered. You choose your responses based on what's authentic and appropriate, not what's expected or habitual. Second, you develop genuine self-compassion. As you recognize how much of your personality was shaped by circumstances beyond your control, you stop being so harsh with yourself for not being perfect. You start treating yourself with the same kindness you'd show a good friend who was struggling. Third, your relationships transform. When you stop trying to be who you think others want you to be, you attract people who appreciate your authentic self. You stop tolerating relationships that require you to betray your truth. You become capable of deeper intimacy because you're no longer hiding significant parts of yourself. Fourth, your creativity explodes. So much creative energy gets trapped when you're constantly suppressing aspects of yourself. As you integrate your shadow and drop unnecessary personas, that energy becomes available for authentic self-expression. Many people discover artistic abilities or innovative ideas they never knew they had. Fifth, your decision-making becomes clearer. When you know who you really are, choices become more obvious. You stop agonizing over decisions because you have a clear internal compass. You trust yourself more because you're operating from authenticity rather than from fear or social conditioning. But perhaps most importantly, you develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty. You become the author of your own life rather than a character in someone else's story. You stop seeking validation from others because you've learned to validate yourself. You stop fearing rejection because you're no longer rejecting yourself. Now, I want to address something crucial. This process isn't comfortable. In fact, it can be downright terrifying at times. When you start questioning your fundamental beliefs about yourself, when you start acknowledging parts of your shadow, when you start dropping personas you've worn for decades, you might feel like you're losing your identity entirely. This is what Jung called psychological death, the death of the false self to make room for the authentic self to emerge. It's a necessary part of the individuation process, but it can feel like you're falling apart. You might experience anxiety, depression, confusion, or a sense that nothing makes sense anymore. This is why having support during this process is so important. Whether it's therapy, trusted friends, spiritual practice, or communities of people on similar journeys, you need witnesses and companions for this inner work. Trying to individuate in complete isolation is unnecessarily difficult and sometimes counterproductive. But here's what's waiting on the other side of this psychological death and rebirth. A sense of aliveness and authenticity that most people never experience. A deep trust in yourself and your ability to navigate life's challenges. A creativity and vitality that comes from no longer fighting against your own nature. Relationships based on genuine connection rather than mutual manipulation or performance. Let me share something that might surprise you. Jung believed that individuation wasn't just personal development. It was actually a moral obligation. He argued that when people live unconsciously, driven by unexamined impulses and social conditioning, they cause tremendous harm to themselves and others. Wars, oppression, environmental destruction, interpersonal cruelty. Jung saw these as symptoms of collective unconsciousness, of masses of people who had never done the inner work to become truly human. In contrast, individuated people take responsibility for their own psychology. They don't project their unresolved issues onto others. They don't try to control others to avoid facing themselves. They contribute to the collective consciousness rather than adding to the collective shadow. This is why your personal journey toward authenticity isn't selfish. It's actually one of the most generous things you can do for the world. Every person who does this inner work makes it easier for others to do the same. Every authentic relationship creates ripples that affect countless other relationships. Every person who stops living from unconscious patterns contributes to the healing of our collective psychological wounds. But let's get practical for a moment. How do you actually begin this process? How do you start identifying your personas and integrating your shadow? How do you begin the journey toward authentic selfhood? First, start paying attention to your reactions. When do you feel like you're performing rather than being authentic? What situations or people trigger your strongest emotional responses? What compliments make you uncomfortable, and what criticisms hit particularly hard? These reactions are breadcrumbs leading you toward unconscious patterns and disowned aspects of yourself. Second, examine your relationships. Who do you feel most authentic with, and who do you feel like you need to perform for? What aspects of yourself do you hide from different people? What do you most judge in others, and what do you most envy? These relationship dynamics reveal both your personas and your shadow projections. Third, explore your dreams and fantasies. Jung believed that dreams were the royal road to the unconscious, revealing aspects of our psyche that we can't access through rational thought. What themes keep appearing in your dreams? What fantasies do you have that you've never shared with anyone? What creative expressions call to you but you've been too afraid to pursue? Fourth, question your beliefs and values. Which of your opinions do you hold because you actually believe them, and which do you hold because they're expected in your social circle? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you pursue if no one would judge you? What aspects of life feel meaningful to you versus what you think should feel meaningful? Fifth, practice what Jung called active imagination. This involves consciously dialoguing with different aspects of your psyche. You might visualize having a conversation with your inner critic, or asking your creative self what it needs to flourish, or thanking your anxious parts for trying to protect you while also setting boundaries with them. The goal isn't to eliminate these different aspects of yourself. It's to develop a conscious relationship with them. Your inner critic, for example, might have valuable insights about quality and standards, but it doesn't need to run your entire internal dialogue. Your people-pleasing tendency might have useful social awareness, but it doesn't need to override your authentic needs and desires. As you begin this work, you'll probably notice that many of your problems start making sense in new ways. That chronic anxiety might be the result of constantly suppressing your authentic self. That pattern of attracting emotionally unavailable partners might be connected to your own emotional unavailability to yourself. That feeling of emptiness despite external success might be the natural result of achieving goals that weren't actually yours to begin with. This recognition can be both liberating and overwhelming. Liberating because you finally understand what's been happening in your psychological life. Overwhelming because you realize how much unconscious living you've been doing and how much work there is to do to reclaim your authentic self. But here's something crucial to remember. This isn't about perfection. Individuation isn't a destination you arrive at, it's an ongoing process of conscious living. You don't complete your shadow work or permanently integrate all your personas. You develop an ongoing relationship with these aspects of yourself, making conscious choices about how to express them in different situations. Some days you'll be more authentic than others. Some days you'll catch yourself slipping into old patterns. Some days you'll discover new aspects of your shadow that you didn't know existed. This is all part of the process. The goal isn't to become a perfectly individuated human being. It's to become a consciously individuating one. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you accept your own complexity and contradictions, the more genuinely simple your life becomes. When you stop fighting against your own nature, when you stop trying to be someone you're not, when you integrate rather than suppress different aspects of yourself, life flows more naturally. You spend less energy on internal conflict and more energy on creative expression. You waste less time on relationships that require you to betray yourself, and more time on connections that nurture your authentic growth. You pursue goals that actually align with your values, rather than chasing achievements that you think will make you acceptable to others. But let me be clear about something. This journey will challenge everything you think you know about yourself and about life. It will require you to question beliefs you've held since childhood. It will ask you to face aspects of yourself that you might find disturbing or embarrassing. It will demand that you take responsibility for your own psychological patterns, rather than blaming others for your unhappiness. This is why so many people choose to stay asleep. It's why they prefer the familiar prison of social conditioning to the unknown territory of authentic selfhood. It's why they choose the safety of conformity over the adventure of individuation. But if you've made it this far in this video, something in you is calling for more. Something in you recognizes that there's a difference between existing and truly living. Something in you knows that you're capable of more authenticity, more creativity, more aliveness than you're currently experiencing. That something is what Jung called the self, the organizing principle of your psyche that seeks wholeness and integration. It's the part of you that's tired of living according to other people's scripts. It's the part of you that's ready to discover who you really are beneath all the conditioning and performance. The question now is, are you ready to listen to that voice? Are you ready to begin the journey from unconscious living to conscious choice? Are you ready to face your shadow, examine your personas, and discover your authentic self? This isn't a decision to make lightly. Individuation requires courage, commitment, and often professional support. But it's also the most rewarding journey you can undertake, because it leads to the one thing that external achievements can never provide: a deep sense of coming home to yourself. If this message has resonated with you, if something in you is saying yes to this journey, I want you to take a moment right now to acknowledge that. Let me know in the comments what part of this video hit you the deepest. Share your own experiences with feeling disconnected from your authentic self. Tell me about the masks you've worn or the aspects of yourself you've kept hidden. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this conversation is just getting started. In our upcoming videos, we'll dive deeper into specific techniques for shadow work, practical methods for identifying and updating your personas, and real-world strategies for living more authentically in a world that often rewards conformity over truth. Your journey towards psychological wholeness starts with a single step: the decision to look honestly at yourself and question the stories you've been told about who you're supposed to be. That step might be scary, but it's also the beginning of the most important adventure of your life, the adventure of discovering who you really are.